The scripture reading is from Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 to 12, the Beatitudes. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who came before you."
Will you pray with me? May the words of my lips and the meditations of each of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So what does one say about a passage so famous, so quoted, so studied, and so beautiful? There are so many ways to go with the Beatitudes, but considering our annual meeting is today, and considering the kind of fixation I've had with keeping communities and relationships alive, there was really one thing that stuck out to me when I was working on this sermon. See, it's really easy to read this beautiful passage as just sort of a set of moral codes to live by and to be uplifted by as individuals. Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who try to keep the peace. Blessed are those who are merciful. And, if we want, we can read this essentially as blessed are those who struggle, those who have it rough, because they'll be okay when the kingdom of heaven comes. And there's nothing inherently wrong with reading it this way. I think it can be really helpful and uplifting when people are really struggling. I think it can be really helpful for us to read this as blessings for individuals to keep us persevering, to keep us on the right path. But it's really so much more than that. If we really look at the context of this passage and look at what inspired it, we can see that it's more than some kind of individualistic moral code. Now, to begin with, Matthew always makes sure to appeal to the disaffected Jewish people of the day. So it's no coincidence that this Sermon on the Mount, that this set of kind of new blessings in this guide for living, Matthew set this up to be a new version of Moses's revelation of the Ten Commandments on top of Mount Sinai. And in understanding this, we can understand that much of this passage was influenced and inspired by Jewish texts and Old Testament prophets. We can begin by looking at blessed are those who mourn. Now, again, if we want, especially if we're grieving a loved one, the loss of a loved one, we can absolutely read this and to take some solace in those times as, understanding that no matter how much we're grieving or mourning, that we are unconditionally loved and comforted by God. But this passage is likely inspired from a passage in Isaiah, in which good news comes to an entire people who are mourning their lost homeland. So this is actually about a collective mourning, a people mourning what once was and what could be. Because although in this time the Jewish people were technically allowed to practice their faith, and though they were technically back in their homeland, they were still living under the boot of the cruel and oppressive Roman Empire. They were still an occupied people. And so this is Jesus telling those crowds that this isn't how it's supposed to be and that it won't be like this forever. The masses will be comforted and the world will be righted. And blessed are the meek. Meek here, it doesn't mean submissive. It doesn't mean we need to be a doormat. It simply means to be humble. It means someone who doesn't take advantage of whatever power or authority they might have in life. It means someone who accepts themselves on equal footing with all other people. And they don't believe themselves to be above anyone else. They certainly don't believe themselves to be above God. So it means be someone who is humble for the sake of all people. The meek will inherit the earth, will be a time in which we are all on equal footing. But I think my favorite example in all of these is blessed are the peacemakers. Now, ironically, the Gospel of Matthew was written during the Pax Romana, those 200 or so years of supposed peace in the Roman Empire. So could one consider the Romans as part of these blessed peacemakers? No, because one doesn't create true peace by way of conquest. True peace doesn't happen when there's a constant threat of crucifixion or some other inhumane punishment or death awaiting you if you step out of line. I mean, do we think Tyree Nichols was feeling any peace before he was beaten to death by the state, by people who might consider themselves peacemakers? So, considering the fact that so much of this Sermon on the Mount was inspired by Jewish texts, it would make sense that the type of peace that Jesus is talking about here would be better translated as shalom. Now, in Christianity and in English, we've kind of taken the easy way out here, and we've translated shalom just simply as peace, and that's not wrong, but it's so much more than just peace. In addition to peace, it means harmony, it means wholeness, and it means welfare. In fact, biblically, in several passages from the Old Testament, it refers to the universal well-being of all other people. And this idea of wholeness is central to the true meaning of shalom. The theologian Cornelius Plantinga describes the biblical concept of shalom like this: the webbing together of God, humans, and all creation in justice, fulfillment, and delight is what the Hebrew prophets called shalom. We call it peace, but it means far more than mere peace of mind or a ceasefire between enemies. Shalom means universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight. Now, in discovering this emphasis of togetherness in today's passage, my memory was jogged of an article, or actually several articles that came out just a couple weeks ago about a Harvard study on happiness. It's the longest ever scientific study on happiness. It was an 85-year study, started during the Depression, actually, on what keeps us happy and content. And according to an Atlantic article that goes over kind of the results of the study and what it means, says, it's brought us to a simple and profound conclusion. Good relationships lead to health and happiness. The trick is that those relationships must be nurtured. Now, this might seem like a simple concept, but sadly, it's not an easy one to put into practice these days. Now, I've talked before about how well before the pandemic, social club membership, church memberships, all these things have been plummeting, have been declining for decades. And then, of course, the pandemic just made everything so much worse so quickly. Now, ironically, it's part of it, the problem is the thing that's helped us be in touch with one another. The internet technology is ultimately sort of pushing us apart because it's face-to-face communication, it's real togetherness that brings about this relational happiness. That's why everything Jesus mentions in this passage has to do with the greater good, has to do with being humble and understanding that we should all be on the same level, that we must work together to create this shalom, to create a true wholeness on this broken earth. And between crazy work hours, overscheduled kids' activities, between the general outrageous demands of today's world, something as simple as meeting up with a friend or organizing a monthly meeting for a social club tends to take a back seat to everything else. And the real issue is that keeping relationships healthy and intact, and therefore keeping communities healthy and active, it takes real work. That same Atlantic article notes, having healthy, fulfilling relationships is its own kind of fitness, social fitness. And like physical fitness, it takes work to maintain. It requires stepping back from the crush of modern life, taking stock of our relationships and being honest with ourselves about what we're devoting our time to and whether we are tending to the connections that help us thrive. We can't create an earth as it is in heaven by ourselves. We need to be in relationship with one another. We need to have support, and we need to support each other if we're going to thrive. Now, this goes for friendships, familial relationships. It goes for the relationships we have with each other. It goes for the commitment that we're able to give things outside of the crush of this world. The commitment we're able to give things that will bring us joy and fulfillment, and that will bring joy and fulfillment to others. A people who mourn together are also a people who are comforted together. A people who humble themselves around one another are a people who respect and love one another. A people who work as peacemakers, who work for shalom, are people who want that wholeness for all people. Now, last night, the church was filled with so much joy, and it was filled also with a sort of relief from the diners who returned after that hiatus. I believe that people really did collectively mourn the loss of that great community event. And there was a real sense of relief and comfort in its return. Because people do long for community and togetherness. They long for a place where everyone is welcome to join together over a meal and laughter. They long for relationships and a place where they can feel safe and comfortable. And last night, one of our dining room volunteers, it was actually a volunteer extraordinaire from the UU Church, Joan Ferriel, towards the end of the time came up to me and exclaimed, "How many people does it take to put this on? There have got to be about 30 people here." And meaning just the people working, not the people dining. And for people, that's the thing, right? For people to have that community that allows them to feel safe and loved, we need help. We need to support each other. We need to support the things that give life to this community and this church. And this just doesn't just go for roast beef suppers. This is all on my mind because we're heading into our annual meeting in just a little bit, and we're going to see the nitty-gritty of those not super fun things, like what the budget looks like for next year, utility costs. We're also going to see people rotating on and off committees, and when we do that, I encourage you to look to the future a little and maybe take a peek at who's rotating off. next year in 2024. Maybe you might be interested in being a deacon and learning the ins and outs of worship services on Sundays and getting to know the people in this community who need a little extra outreach and some more relationship. Maybe you have incredible executive functioning skills, unlike myself, and you're really organized. And in the future, you might want to see what being an assistant clerk or an assistant treasurer is. Maybe you're really creative and innovative, and you have ideas for other uses the community could have for this building, in which case you'd make a great trustee. Because with all these ways to get involved, you won't just be lifting up the church, you'll be lifting up one another and lifting up this whole community. As another article referencing that happiness study states, it's not just about having a partner. The science tells us that we should be cultivating relationships of all kinds in every realm of life. And this is in the Beatitudes. This is essentially what Jesus is telling us. In every realm of our lives, we have to make an effort towards real togetherness and community. We will mourn together, but therefore we will be comforted together. We will see one another as equals, and therefore the world will be ours. We may be scoffed at sometimes, but we will be scoffed at together, knowing that we are doing what is right in God's eyes and what's right for this community. We will work to create shalom, goodness, and welfare for all people, so that we all know that we are beloved children of God. But the key words here are we and all. And as much as the society we live in pushes us hard into ideas of individualism, these toxic, every person for themselves kind of mentalities, as much as the society does everything in its power to make sure we don't work together to make a better world, to make an earth as it is in heaven, we have to hold strong and continue to work for shalom. Both the science and Jesus tell us that to be fulfilled and happy, we will need to see one another. We will need to connect with one another, have real relationships with one another. We have to work together for the good of one another and for the good of community. We have to work together for the very real possibility of an earth as it is in heaven. Amen.